Hello, I'm Kim Robledo-Diga, Interim Director of Education at Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum. We're delighted to be celebrating the Detroit Month of Design with our Juror just announced 2021 National Design Award winners. I'm pleased to welcome you to our panel discussion today, looking at contemporary challenges and opportunities in design, including equity and climate change, as well as the role of collaboration, particularly with local communities. We're hosting this important conversation as part of our National Design Awards Cities initiative, bringing together our esteemed National Design Award winners and jurors virtually to cities around the country to share the power of design to change the world. Thank you to our winners and jurors for continuing to support our mission. The National Design Awards is our largest education initiative, and we're celebrating design throughout National Design Month this October. We invite you to join us throughout the month for free design education programs and activities. Visit cooperhewitt.org to learn more and sign up for a program. We invite you to join today's conversation using the chat box. And at the end of the hour, we'll open up for live questions and comments. Feel free to add any questions for our panelists along the way to the Q&A box. It is my great pleasure now to introduce our moderator, Kofi Boone. Kofi served on the jury for the 2021 National Design Awards, helping to select this wonderful group of winners. A Detroit native and a graduate of the University of Michigan, Kofi is a university faculty scholar and professor in the Department of Landscape Architecture and Environmental Planning at NC State University in the College of Design. His work is in the overlap between landscape architecture and environmental justice, with specializations in democratic design, digital media, and interpreting cultural landscapes. He serves on the board of directors of the Corps Network, as well as the Landscape Architecture Foundation, where he's president-elect. Boone serves on the advisory board of the Black Landscape Architects Network. Welcome, Kofi, and thank you for leading our conversation.
Thank you very much, Kim, and thanks everybody for being with us today. It was a great honor to serve on this jury. We were blown away by all of the entries. And as a Detroit native, I'll first acknowledge my people and give you a salute and say, what up, though? But also I'd like to offer a land acknowledgement because now I'm in North Carolina. So I'm coming to you from the land of the Eno and the Saponi and the Socorri and the Cherokee and many other indigenous groups. And from them, we asked permission to share these words with you. As stated, it was a great honor. And when the opportunity came to share these wonderful people and projects and thinking with you in Detroit, jumped at the opportunity. So glad to be here with you. We'd like to go through their introductions. I'm going to introduce each one as they are listed in the program, and then allow them to share a few minutes with you about who they are and what they do, and then we'll engage in a moderated conversation that will hit some of the topics that have already been foregrounded by Kim in that great introduction and other topics. So hopefully it's a great use of time, and then we welcome your questions. So please, if things come up, please put them in the chat and in the Q&A, and we will try and address them towards the end of the program. But beginning, I'd like to start with Doris Sun, who is the winner of the Climate Action Award this year. Through her work, Sun seeks to make building skins sensitive and responsive to the changing environment. She's the founder of Los Angeles-based Dosu Studio Architecture, the director of undergraduate programs at USC, and the recipient of fellowships, including Google's Research and Development funding for the built environment, as well as the United States Artists and Rockefeller Foundation at Bellagio. So with that, welcome, Doris. If you have a few minutes to introduce yourself, it would be great.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will expand on that a little. I'm also a co-founder of TVM Designs, in addition to the other hats that I wear. To describe myself, I am Asian. I'm 5 foot tall. I'm in my 50s. I'm medium build, and I have a pixie haircut, wearing yellow rimmed glasses today. I have to say those change because I don't always wear these glasses. I'm going to share my screen right now so that you can see a few slides. Let me do that quickly here. I hope you probably see a black screen at this point in time. I want to say that I was originally a biology major when I was in college, but decided to follow it up with architecture school instead of medical school. I can go in that a little more detail, but not at this moment. After working in the profession for 15 years as an architect, I decided to convert my client-based practice into a research-based one in 2005. Since then, I have been working with smart materials, namely thermal bimetal, to develop building products that self-shade, self-ventilate, self-structure, self-assemble, and self-propel. Sometimes people will call that robotics, actually. With some of the technologies, I can generate energy and filter smog as well. The product that I received the Cooper Hewitt National Design Award is for a self-shading window system called InVert. It is trapped inside the cavity of a standard double glazed window and reacts to the moving sun by flipping and blocking the solar radiation from entering the building. Many people say it looks like fluttering butterflies and keeps them in tune with what is happening outside in the environment. The result is a reduction in energy used for air conditioning, which can be up to 25%, and an improvement in human wellness due to the reduction of tinted coatings on windows. That means more natural daylighting and color spectrum, both essential to human wellness. It's like removing sunglasses and seeing a world full of colors, both essential to human wellness. And finally, because this product needs no wiring and controls, it's very affordable and low in maintenance. So thank you very much for having me. I'm super happy to be here. I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Doris. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to Bryan Lee Jr., who was winner of this year's Emerging Designer Award. Bryan is the founder of Colloqate Design, a multidisciplinary nonprofit design justice practice based in New Orleans, with a focus on expanding community access to and building power through the design of social, civic, and cultural spaces. Bryan.
Thank you, Kofi. I appreciate it. Alexa, I don't know if you're sharing or if you want me to share. I can share. Oh, there we go. All right. And you can just flip through these. I'll talk a little bit about where we are. So again, thank you very much, Kofi. It's a pleasure to be on this panel with all of the other awardees. Again, my name is Bryan C. Lee Jr. I am the principal of Colloqate Design out of New Orleans, Louisiana. We just opened up an office in Portland as well. And I'm a Black man, about 6 feet tall, a mustache and a beard, about dark skinned, and I've got a short Caesar haircut. I also have headphones on at the moment. So just to kind of give you a sense of the work that we do, our work is kind of centered on design justice. The kind of definition of our firm Colloqate is based on the sequence of people in place juxtaposed at a greater frequency than chance. It is fundamentally about power and place. It's about people power, it's about institutional power, and the way that those things manifest themselves in the physical environment. We talk about power from the perspective that for nearly every injustice in this world that we know that there is an architecture, a plan, a design that sustains it. We understand that power in earnest is a way for a recognition that all histories of revolution are based in land, based in the derivatives of land, and how we negotiate our environment relative to that power is extremely important. We also recognize that our values are validated through the spaces and places we design, and that ultimately it is about how we care about our communities. So design justice is what love looks like in public spaces. This is cribbed from Cornel West, where he talks about justice is what love looks like in public. It is fundamentally about our way to consider what culture looks like in physical space. And we talk about culture as the opportunity to recognize a protest as the To protest is to have an unyielding faith in the power of a just society. It is fundamentally about our collective hope for what might move us forward. And then lastly, you can flip through any of these. Sorry, we could just pass through. So each of these images, you'll see that there are people and there are outcomes, and there are a couple renderings here as well. But again, just to kind of close out, design justice for us is a way for us to kind of forward a radical anti-racist vision of racial, social, and cultural reparations through the process and outcomes of design. So I say radical because it asks us to get to the root of a particular condition. I say reparations because all of our work requires us to consider how we repair and heal our communities as we move forward. And then fundamentally, I say process and outcomes because it is not enough just to have a pretty picture, but it is necessary to invest the communities we serve into those spaces, or else those spaces will then be rejected long term. And then lastly, design justice calls on us to challenge the privilege and power structures that we use in architecture to maintain systems of oppression. So how do we challenge that moving forward? I like to think, and I think part of the recognition of this award is that all of our work seeks to do that and to rethink how we bring communities into a space where their power is the driving force for the architecture you see in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Bryan. It's fantastic. Our third panelist is Mia Lehrer, who is our winner of the Landscape Architecture Award. Mia is the president of Studio-MLA, which integrates landscape architecture, urban design, and planning, and creating places that inspire human connection, unite communities, and restore environmental balance. Advocacy by design is a foundation of the practice. Mia.
Hey, hello and thank you. I'm a native of El Salvador, a Latina. Although I'm white and today I have my hair in a ponytail, brown haired ponytail. I speak multiple languages and have lived in many other places in the world. And I arrived in California 40 years ago from some East Coast time. But here I am, and thank you. Hopefully that gives you a visual. But I'm often judged about where I'm from. And being that I've been joined in LA with many Central Americans, they always love to talk to me as we do our community workshops in Spanish and really spill their hearts and souls. And we share a lot together. I'm president of the studio and a fellow of the American Society of Landscape Architects and former member of the U.S. Fine Arts Commission, where I was named by President Obama, where I had a fantastic experience, and immensely proud to be the newest commissioner of the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, the largest public utility in the country, and for the first time, an all-female group of commissioners. An amazing honor that was bestowed on me by the mayor, Eric Garcetti, and one which holds a tremendous amount of responsibility. And little did I think when I was in graduate school at Harvard that I would be prepared through my experience, not only at the school, but over time, to take on this rather interesting set of challenges and sort of be able to contribute to the important conversations of our times that have to do with power and water and many other sort of climate change issues. We're focused at Studio-MLA on landscape architecture, urban design, and planning, and we live and practice by our core values. We think holistically, looking to build places that create justice and equity, delight and prosperity. We do so through working collaboratively with nature, transforming places to perform multiple purposes at once, and designing them to adapt with durability for future generations. We see design and the creation of parks and open spaces as a way to advocate for communities. We know that government leadership leads to vision, and as we implement that vision, we look for opportunities to tell the stories that are layered within places, stories of people, neighborhoods, and you can continue changing it. Stories of neighborhoods, hope and conflict, water, air, ecology, and empowerment. Here you see a project, Vista Hermosa Park. Before that, we had Hollywood Park, where we had the opportunity to build a central park for the Inglewood community as part of what we never would have thought we would be involved in, which was a large theater and also a stadium. Our mantra, advocacy by design. In the built environment, we advocate, and we understood over time that leadership leads to vision, policy leads to funding, funding leads to planning, and if you're tenacious, design materializes and empowers. So that's really been our mantra, which is basically helping people understand our design and sort of methodology and what we can contribute. What you see here on the images is you see 2 mayors and 2 council people and 1 assemblyman all taking credit for the funding of the project that was built, which was Vista Hermosa. And on the bottom right, one of my major sort of I'm his major hero, if you would say that. He's one of the 3 leaders of gangs in the area around Vista Hermosa, who became our best friend, who has kept the place safe and has tried to transform himself and has really absorbed the opportunities that community work can bring to him that are positive and sort of that really contribute to the community. So with that, I hope this helps us understand sort of some of what we do.
It's fantastic, Mia. I still get energized seeing these. It's been a couple of months since we were pouring through many, many, many entries, but hopefully the audience can see why these rose to the top. They're just fantastic projects and people and work. So, and I'm remiss in not describing myself. I am middle-aged. I'm a 50-year-old Black man, medium complexion, salt and pepper hair, glasses, and had a few too many Hostess Twinkies. So hopefully that describes me on the screen. I'd like to jump into some of the questions that hopefully will guide our discussion. And one of those that's come up several times as we've started to prepare for this session, and something that we did not talk about as a jury, but might be of interest, is your journey, your design journey, how you arrived at your chosen profession in your field. I know that it's important. We've discussed off camera the importance of helping young people in particular from diverse communities to see design as sort of a pathway moving forward. I'm curious if you could share a little bit about your journey. How did you get interested in design? Mia, you're on my camera, so would you like to start?
Sure. Interested in design or inspired are 2 kind of slightly, I know they come together. I grew up in the tropics, and with incredible volcanoes and mountains and unbelievable sort of tree cover and hummingbirds and many other types of birds surrounding the small city that I lived in. And my father, who is an immigrant from Europe, it was like giddy about nature. So there was no weekend that we weren't going somewhere just to take a walk, to go to a waterfall, to go to the ocean, to reach a little island off a lake, or to climb a volcano where half the time you were going up, you were coming back down. But at the end, there was a beautiful view of a crater. So I just, that sort of, it was in my DNA to sort of celebrate, and orchids, of course, everywhere. And so I was very, sort of passionate about the world around me and really started this construct. And I think I didn't know how that would materialize. And just to make it short, I mean, I was reading, I was studying environmental design. I found it a little bit esoteric. And then at some point I walked into an exhibit of 6-foot long drawings of Central Park by Frederick Law Olmsted. And I looked at it and I said, holy cow, what is that? You know, I'm 19 at that point, and the drawings, I've since seen the drawings, and they were 9 feet long. So because the librarian showed them to me, and I thought, I want to know what that is. And I went into the library and talked to the librarian, and I was sent upstairs to talk to the head of the department. And then I was just, you know, I was hooked to this profession that could do so much. And little did I know what I would uncover and how much it would unfold and how relevant our profession is to our time and to my sense of play, my sense of our place in our communities and what I can actually offer back, which is just awesome.
It's fantastic. And next year is Frederick Olmsted's 200th birthday. So there'll be many, many events and activities sort of honoring that legacy. So that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Bryan, what was your journey? How did you get interested in design?
Ooh, long one, but I'll try to pace it. So essentially, when I was about 7 to 10, I lived in Sicily in Comiso. My mother was a military commander, and we traveled from place to place. And so from Trenton, New Jersey, when I came back to the States, you kind of are completely aware of the dissonance between those two typologies of space. And that kind of stayed with me. So about 10, 11, when we were moved in with my grandmother in Trenton, I said, I want to design a space that feels more like that for you, basically, for my grandmother. And my parents said that that's what being an architect is. And so that was kind of the initial impetus moving forward. And moving on into high school, I had the opportunity to take a mechanical drawing class and then a set of architecture classes, and got really excited. And, probably not supposed to say this, but, back in the day, people used to copy CDs of Autodesk. Sorry, Autodesk. But one year I took all of the Autodesk CDs from school, brought them to my house, copied them. My parents were livid. They were like, what are you doing? You can't steal Autodesk CDs. We'll buy stuff for you. And that was kind of their inspiration to help me move forward. And then from there, there's a couple other just like quick things. One is that I went through school and felt a sense of loneliness, right? And as a Black person in predominantly white institutions, I joined and helped to run the National Organization of Minority Architect Students at The Ohio State University, and then president both at Ohio State and at New Jersey Institute of Technology, where I went to grad school. When I finished grad school, I was pretty done with architecture, and so I decided to kind of write and try to understand how I wanted to exist in the world and exist as an architect in this space. And so I wrote a lot of what we did today, which is kind of the origins of what design justice really is. And then a few years later, I got the opportunity to start a little program called Project Pipeline, which had its origins in Cincinnati, David Kirk, in 2005. By 2012, I got to run that program locally. And then nationally, we turned it into a design justice or a social justice through architecture and design camp that now has served over 17,000 kids over the last decade. And so that's been the kind of pathway. And being able to teach was really, really fascinating, because it then led into a lot of the groundwork and foundational work of our practice, right? A lot of the stuff we did there, because of the way that we had to communicate with young people, allowed us to kind of communicate with communities in a very specific way as well, to build the tools to be able to have more proper conversation with folks. So sorry, long story, but that's kind of the pathway through.
That was fantastic. Actually, we're right on time, so don't feel restricted when we keep moving. I think we're doing great. And I won't report you to Autodesk, so we'll work that out. Doris, how about you? What about your journey How did you get
I
interested?
guess different than the others, I did not think I wanted to go to design at an early state. Having immigrant parents, they basically saw, you know what I mean, you're either a doctor, you're a lawyer, or you go into business. And that was the choices. So when I went to college, I fortunately liked biology. I liked the sciences. So I was a biology major. I also liked the arts at that time. And I even asked my parents if I could major in visual arts, and they said, absolutely not. Again, as immigrants, they said, there's no way you're going to do that in college. But I secretly did take studio art courses every single semester. So if there were such a thing as a minor that I could have done at that time, I probably minored in visual arts, which was significant because I think it gave me the introduction to using and touching and working with my hands and materiality. So when I was in college, I was going to head to medical school. That was what I thought I was going to do. And my advisor told me that it would be really cool if I had a different major when I made my application, because it would set me apart from all the thousands of other biology majors. And so at that time, it was a liberal arts school. So we took a lot of different courses. And I thought, oh, well, architecture sounds kind of cool. It seems pretty easy, you know, like I'll just do that. So I started taking more architecture courses and started becoming interested in doing that. When I graduated, I then decided not to apply to medical school, but to go to work. And the only skill I had to get a job was in architecture by drafting. And so I started working in an architecture office in Boston. They offered to pay for graduate school for me. And I thought, wow, I must be okay at this. And so I actually didn't take their offer because it required me going back to that office, but I really started to think about what architecture was and how I'd enjoy it. So I did go to architecture school. In our architecture school, I think the good and bad thing is without having any preconceptions of what architecture was supposed to be, I asked a lot of questions that maybe some people thought was off, you know what I mean, outlier type of maybe even stupid questions. And so the question that I always asked when I was in architecture is why architecture was static, and why it didn't move, and why could it not breathe, and why couldn't it be like clothing even? If clothing could move with us, you know what I mean, then why couldn't architecture do the same, and why couldn't it be sensitive? And so that was a question that I often and always asked all the way through my thesis projects. Fast forward, I then practiced as an architect for many years, licensed. Thought I had aspirations at that time to become a great architect. And early 2000, started getting really concerned and obsessed with climate change and the problems of climate. And so I started looking at architecture again, saying, well, why isn't architecture changing and doing anything about this? Why don't we have more products that are looking at, you mean, issues of climate change? Why are we just sitting here building houses the same way we always build houses? And then, of course, we see things that are happening with weather and the devastation throughout. So in about 2005, I decided to change my practice, as I said before, from a client-based practice into a research-based one. And I thought, if no one's going to do it, then I'm just going to try and go in that direction and you mean go after grants and those kind of things to develop them. So that's kind of the route that I took, and that's kind of leads me to where I am. And a lot of people ask me the question of how, you know what I mean, I get the aesthetics to what I do and the work that I do. And I think some of it comes from, again, the art background that I have and the interest in materiality. And the other is still from that biology background, because I still look to biology, both plants and animals and things, for inspiration. For ideas on how these things should move and activate and be dynamic. So it's kind of a roundabout way. It's probably later than everyone else. And if you asked me, you know, different points in time, if this is where I ever thought I would be, I would say, no, I never imagined I'd be here at this point in time in my life.
No, that's really rich. And, you know, there are clearly moments at decision points in everybody's stories when it could have gone one way or another. And you found the perseverance and the clarity to move forward. With that, I'd like to just follow up with everybody. You know, your individual pathways and your journeys were very inspirational. But I know in Detroit and in other cities, in terms of getting another generation excited about the opportunity of design, we've had a few conversations about pathways. Bryan's work with Project Pipeline may be the most direct, but I think all of you have considered this. What's one thing an observation you would make in terms of a pathway for others who may want to, move forward in design? What would you put out there as a way of doing that? Something that we should take on. Anybody can answer if you like.
I'll just do a quick one, which is for those who have not really had to deal with marginalization or some version of injustice or oppression. It's easy to see architecture as a formal pursuit of objects. But for young people like in Detroit, like in New Orleans, like in LA, across the country who have faced those things, the object disconnected from the humanity of the individuals turns people off. And so whether it's migrant backgrounds or just those who have diasporic backgrounds, I think recognizing that there's so much power in the humanity of individuals, and our architecture has spent so much time, landscape and the physical architecture has spent so much time trying to be disconnected from that humanity that it will continue to shun people until it finds a way back into that space.
So I would thank you for. I think that it's obvious that the three of us come from the opportunity and privilege of studying and having parents who understood and cared about our understood the future. I will say, although my parents grew up in teenagehood in Europe, they did not finish high school. They left. There was a war, there was persecution, and they left. And so, but this what I think is this sense of opportunities that exist where the newer generation or sort of the communities that arrive in America just don't have no. It's so complicated. And the pathways to entry are so hard that you just don't get it. I mean, somehow you get on a soccer team, right? I mean, everybody does sports. They do go to school. Most of this next generation does go at least through high school, but then there's no sense of what's possible next. And there is no models at home, and they will say that, they will, if you talk to a group of them. So I work really hard, and it's been hard during COVID, right? I mean, I know at ASLA, American Society of Landscape Architects, and AIA have programs in high schools for students, and many of our colleagues here at the studio are committed to those programs, but it's been really hard. So I think that, I see this group actually as, just being able to inspire that next generation by virtue of helping them with these pipelines and going. I had the pleasure, one of my focuses at the Department of Water and Power is jobs and the opportunities for jobs and pipelines, and what are some of the engineering, management, and other opportunities there are. And one of the women presented to us, and that's what's inspired me, is that she was the first person to get a special certificate that was just created like 5 years ago to be a line worker. That means she climbs up large, immense poles and gets hooked up, and she's a woman doing it. That's always really special. So as she described her experience, because she was almost on the street, and this job has kept her family, housed, and she's so excited about her work. They call her the First Lady. So I'm determined to introduce her to the First Lady very soon. But that program is amazing. And so like that, I really think it's important to have, be able to introduce people to the design fields, to the, creative fields as fields that can be appreciated, respected, and well compensated. And that there are souls around us that really need that kind of opportunity, and that no, they don't necessarily, they probably wouldn't make great, firemen for A or B reason or a great other thing, but that this is a pathway that is multifaceted and so interesting, and that architecture is different from landscape architecture, different from urban design, and that's the hard work our generation has to do to help people kind of understand the opportunities.
Yeah, and I'd like to add, I'd like to first say that the nice thing in our industry, in the environmental, built world industry, I think, is that we need not only diversity, but diverse ideas and people with diverse backgrounds and diverse interests in it. It's something that we benefit from no matter what. That you don't have to come from, again, the straight path to enter our field. And that's the great thing about it, which I think is maybe a little more difficult in other fields because of the steps that you have to take to get into it. The work that we have to do, that I think Mia's referring to, and also Bryan, is that we have to find ways to make those pathways a little more open and available, so that that it's not, it doesn't feel like a closed system or a closed path to the future, because I actually think it's something for everyone. You can even see on the panel here how diverse all of our backgrounds are, and not only that, about the areas that we work in. Architecture is not necessarily in the capital A architecture, but a little more in the peripheral way, which is very robust and very broad. So I think we do have our work cut out for us in trying to open up and make those pathways happen. But at the same time, I think it's a field that is welcoming and open and needing more voices and diverse voices.
It's fantastic. And I will be honest, until we started talking, didn't see the composition of the panel. Now I see it with clearer eyes, and I think it's a great representation of the many pathways, the many interests, sort of validating that, Doris, your point about diverse points of view as being necessary moving forward. I'd like to move on to another topic. Detroit has a lot of really valuable legacies, but one of its legacies is design, and it was home and is still a place where making is valued, right? And moving forward, how do we begin to make things that help us deal with these grand challenges, climate change, justice, a number of other issues. And part of that requires collaboration and working with other people. So I wanted to start with Bryan, if you're willing to share an example of how collaborating with people and responding to local culture impacted your work.
Yeah, certainly. I've done a lot of work around advocacy and justice work in New Orleans. But a couple, I'll tell you two quick projects. One is called Lights Out, and Lights Out was a assessment analysis of the landscape of housing after post-Katrina, right? So Lights Out was a kind of creative endeavor that connected artists and architects and community members to not just assess properties, but to understand their cultural value, right? And so our job was both to educate a public and to demonstrate physically by going to these places to acknowledge not just the passing of these physical spaces almost in the way that a human passes, right? To honor them, right? To honor their passing to some extent. And so part of that project was to think about the kind of language of culture interaction in New Orleans. One is like a second line. So a second line is a way for us to kind of acknowledge those who have lived and passed in New Orleans, and it's a celebration of life and death, essentially. So we dance through the streets. It's a parade with a band, and it's such a lovely event, and it connects you to culture. If you don't know what it is, please look up a second line. But we took that language, that idea of a second line, and we did that as a cultural assessment of property. So we, instead of going from bar to bar or from organization to organization, we went from derelict property to derelict property. We talked about the property values. We talked about how much these properties were underwater, how they were kind of connected to the overall larger system of housing in the city. And so instead of it being a drab, dire report, we actually were able to communicate with hundreds and hundreds of people in a second line about each of these buildings, and talk more openly about the history and stories of these places. One of the images you saw earlier was of this project. So anyway, that's a really direct way in which we connect to culture. The second one is just briefly is about paper monuments. So paper monuments was a way for us to kind of reconsider Confederate monuments that were littered across the city of New Orleans from 125 years ago to present. So in 2015, we started this process, this movement to remove monuments across the city. And in doing so, really wanted to make sure that whatever came next was a reflection of the community and the culture that existed here, right, or in the city. And part of that process was, through paper monuments, was to make sure that the visual artists were connected with true community members. So we collected thousands of proposals from, young people and our elders, from everyone we could talk to. We talked to 10,000 people. We made 20,000 newspapers to share out the community voice. And the artists took those respondents, of those thousands of people who responded, and they translated that kind of cultural aspect that they kind of overlaid into the work and made public art that was based on it. So we worked and coordinated those artists. We designed pieces ourselves to hold some of that art. And it was really a massive planning process that sought to embed culture in public spaces. It was huge. So I think those are the kind of anchor ways in which we do this work. And our current project is called Storia, which is really, it started in 2014, but got new life last year. But that original project was called the Culture and Civic Museums Project, right? And so it is fundamentally about how we embed larger and larger scales of cultural memory anchored to site, right? We start from paper, we might move to markers in place, we then move to memorials, to monuments, to museums, and just continue to grow and hold space for culture, for justice, and the like. So that's the frame around culture and how we think it invests into all of our work, not just some. Bless you.
Fantastic. Mia, how has collaborating with community and working with local culture impacted your work?
Yes, thank you. We've been working on rivers and the river in Los Angeles for a few decades, and inspired originally actually by a poet from Texas who actually saw the possibilities as he wrote about the river, what the possibilities of that channel would be and could be. Interesting, Lewis McAdams. But more recently, and it dovetails into this whole thing about advocacy and also how policy leads to funding, and that helping people imagine what we do by drawing it, by quantifying things really helps. And so all that work, and then the work, of course, of some of the community groups that we work with, like Heal the Bay, like the Green LA Coalition, led to some funding that was associated with basically environmental and social justice and economic justice. So funding became available, and you could then, if you proved, economic, environmental, and social justice issues for an area, you would get funding to then produce some studies and then actually soon implement some of this work. So in doing that, we studied, at the time it was in the upper LA River, it's the tributaries. So everybody had been calling the river is the stem. Oh, that's just the stem, which was always like, it just became a term recently. And I was like, what, the stem? Okay. And then it occurred to us, yeah, the tributaries, they're part of a system, where were we? And so we started, we won the project to study the tributaries, and there are 16 of them. And we studied only some because of the half of them didn't have environmental or economic or social justice the same amount of points. That's fine, it's all going to happen. But going through each of those tributaries and understanding how they traveled through communities and the emotional connection that people had to these just path, basically some of them are channels, some of them are naturalized, but there was a connection that was rather different from the connection to the stem. And we worked with like 8 environmental nonprofits and community groups that were also nonprofits. And it was led by one of the council offices who is very passionate about their community. And it was just, the meetings were really very, very productive, helping people understand that, what could be changed? How could it be changed? You mean if you put a pedestrian bridge, I can actually walk from my house to the school and actually go have a nice path, not just like go around, some big, potentially under freeways and over, under freeways really, and just industrial areas. And so it really led to, and then everybody understood that they weren't, their tributary had different characteristics than other tributaries, right? So there was this sort of sense of weaving of these community groups and of the stakeholders and the community members where they started understanding, what was up. I remember sitting with, Monica Rodriguez, the councilwoman in that area, and her team, and they were describing how much asthma there was in that area. And I hadn't, it's like in all the times I've been working in some of these communities, I had not experienced a lot of people with cases of asthma. And 2 of the people in the room out of 8 who actually work in the district had horrible cases of asthma. So it really became clear, and it was like just this weaving, I said, of these communities, understanding one another, having a better sense of, what the process you have to go through in order to get to designs, to ideas, designs, and then projects that can be pushed for funding. That was really meaningful. And I said, we did storyboards for each of the tributaries that the children and the high school students actually worked on with us, so that they had this sense, like what's a section, what's a plan, and how do you, pictures that you could actually put together in collage form. So that was that. And since then, of course, now we have another set of tributaries that are pretty incredibly interesting. And we're all very, we now know how to go through this process. And I think we're on to something that could be where some of the federal funding that will be coming in will be able to help with this infrastructure. And then lastly, not least importantly, but really very meaningful, is Destination Crenshaw. So Destination Crenshaw is a quarter. Phil's firm, Phil Friedland's firm originally has been working on that project. I was with Phil on the Commission of Fine Arts. That 1.5 miles on Crenshaw, where they built basically a rail line. Oops, they forgot. Well, because we don't really care about these communities, they didn't do it. They didn't do it underground, and it's not overhead. It's basically somewhere in the middle. So the absolute havoc, sort of urbanistically, of crossing, to the line and then crossing across to the next, sidewalk is just a mess. And so we were hired with Pickens and Will to look at that corridor, led by an amazing, actually originally a labor community leader and now a councilman, to actually look at the district and try to get a better understanding of what the opportunities were to connect east, west, north, south, and to create a series of moments throughout the community where there was nothing. I mean, it was really, even the parking lots, and I'm not talking COVID, the parking lots 3 years ago were just these desolate places. They had taken down a lot of the trees that I had been involved in planting with an organization 10 years before in order to build this area. And so Marquise Harris Dawson is the councilman, and he has managed to get very large grants and also funding from our Metro group to actually make some of this start happening. We're starting out with the park at Lehrer, and then it's moving forward with a series of these like pocket parks along the way. We call it a linear museum because you'll be able to experience it by foot, by bike, and from metro and bus. And I'll just tell you, in terms of the art community from the area, all being engaged, having opportunities to actually create art in all these spaces, it's been awesome. And sadly, we actually witnessed closely the Nipsey Hussle murder, meaning we weren't there, but almost, and we had gotten to know him, and he had been very generous and very involved. And it's a pretty, it's a big loss, obviously, to the community at large. So those are two sets of projects that they're messy. I tell students, if I was you, my son who went to architecture school, I asked him, what should I talk to the students about? And he said, talk about how you got to where you got to. And one of the things I realized is that we all have to find our own voices. Clearly, the three of us have. And that although for decades I bemoaned not being on the cover of Landscape Architecture magazine, in the end, my amazing sort of, I'm so appreciative of being surrounded like people, like the community from LAF, the community, from all the nonprofits, and you all on the dais here. Just like it's important to think about that. You don't go to work for someone so you could be on the cover of a magazine. Find your path, find your voice, and follow it. And just this is a profession that this is not a job 9 to 5. This is a calling and something to really think about as you move forward.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. I wanted to move on to another topic, and then at that point, we'll probably be ready to open it up for question and answer, because this one's a bit more involved, but want to give everyone enough time to address it. Dealing with sort of the ecosystem of social change. We started even with the intros with people's declarations on their perspectives of justice, reparations, the roles that design plays. And one real privilege with all the work was that, usually when you're talking about design and a jury, you end up focusing in on the formal qualities of the artifact, right? The aesthetics, the form, that kind of thing. And what was nice was that everybody had cleared that level. So although they were important, to hold a level of rigor and clarity, that really wasn't, the highest level. The highest level was each one really celebrated how design could do more than just provide, beautiful artifacts. That there was an underlying sort of ethic to it. And I wanted to lead this section off with Doris, like in the context of Detroit, which is in the process of going through a number of changes. And for a number of us, when we hear pandemic, we hear the public health part of pandemic, we hear the COVID-19 pandemic, but in actuality, we've dealt with multiple revelations that have been revealed through that process, from the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd in 2020 to our lack of preparedness dealing with the after effects of Hurricane Ida. I mean, there are just multiple layers of challenges that we're all facing, but we've all kind of carved out niches where we think we can do the most good and make the most change. And Doris, one thing that really struck the jury was with your work, the potential to scale up, right? So it's really about the potential to even adapt existing structures, right, with this particular innovation. And if you've had any thoughts about what that scaling up might mean, might that seed small business enterprises? Is this something where local businesses could take this technology and make it locally? Or have you thought about the dissemination and how this could spread in the context of dealing with climate change?
Yeah, definitely. It was a component of the development of the project itself. Just to back up a little bit too, the technology that I developed is a combination of engineering and design. And I say that because design was really important. In engineering, when they make things, there's these small tweaks and there's a whole methodology of scientific method that they have to follow to develop some technology. But the beauty of design is we don't have to follow that methodology necessarily. And we have these kind of moments where it's like, oh, I have a great idea and we execute it. And you see that happen a little more also in commercial enterprise. So for example, in developing the iPhone, they did not have to publish, and wait till it comes out in publications. There was basically an attitude of first to market. And I think that speaks to a lot of architects and landscape architects and advocacy. We don't sit there and think about how we're going to patent this thing. We just get it out there as quickly as possible. So in moving forward too, which for us was a big learning curve, because I don't know very much about commercializing products or how to bring things to market. But with the real drive that we had to bring these things, because who else is going to do that again, except if it's not us. And so we started this startup company to do that. The model that I think you're talking about of scaling up was really thought through carefully too, because typically you would build a manufacturing plant, start building it, and shipping it all over the world, get the orders out, and that would be the most efficient way of handling it. But in the case of these windows that we made, it turned out that there's no single large manufacturers of what's called IGUs, or insulated glass units. And what that is the double glazed window system that you see on all commercial buildings now. And so that system already was decentralized, and there's thousands of smaller companies across the US, around the world, that actually make them. And so they're made locally. And the nice thing is, because they're made locally, they don't have a very huge footprint when it comes to carbon footprint in transportation. And so using that type of system, we are connecting with all these different manufacturers of IGUs, and they're, I guess you can call them a little more like micro factories as opposed to very large ones dispersed all over the place, and therefore can have them and our windows built very local to the construction site to reduce that, as well as increase the amount of commerce in the area with that kind of product. The inserts that we have in there, the smart bimetal that actually does the shading, can also be done locally because we're using what's called CAM, or computer aided manufacturing. And so because we have these all digitized, and we can use laser cutting or stamping in anywhere in the world by sharing that information, it can also be done in different countries and different locales simultaneously. So it's a whole attitude to how this is going to be dispersed, manufactured locally, and then installed. It's an attitude to thinking about, again, the carbon footprint and greenhouse gases and what we're doing to the earth and human wellness, or sorry, planet wellness, as well as trying to uplift the local economy and help those micro factories and supporting them.
I think it's fantastic, this sort of consistency, right? So part of the challenge of what you created was dealing with climate change, not having to rely on those polluting infrastructures and those systems that perpetuate, the emissions that contribute to the problem, but, really taking full advantage of this decentralization as a way of working. That's just really a nice synergy there. And I'd like to continue on that with regards to the role of research and innovation. How do you see that within this whole system of trying to use design to implement social change?
Well, I think it's interesting that you asked that in regards to the last question too, that you were talking about the collaboration. Collaboration is really key in research and development now. I think in everything that we do, it is not done in isolation or in a bubble. There's another project, for example, that we're working on, which is to filter air in urban canyons. We're working with civil engineers, we're working with aerospace automobile engineers, we're working with people in preventive medicine and public policy. We have a very large team of trying to think of using building facades for the public good, for public health. It's a different attitude to how it's ever been done, because that's owned by usually private developers or private owners. But we're trying to figure out a way to make that surface potentially be owned by the city, actually. And so it could be used for many, many different things if we really rethink the structure of what those surfaces can be. So it can clean air, in our case, in the project, or it could clean water, or it can provide farming surface, all these different things if we separate that liminal surface from the building. It's a big task. It's I think it's very ambitious. I think it's a crazy idea. But like I said before, I think that's the beauty of design, is we can sit there and think in terms of crazy ideas and really try to move forward to change the world and make it much more equitable. So that's one project. And then the manufacturing and that whole world of collaboration is a whole separate thing too.
Thank you for filling in that gap. I didn't follow up regarding collaboration. Clearly your work is collaborative as well. So that's fantastic. I'd like to move on to Bryan. And we've gotten a little taste of some of the responses to this next question, but the role of mobilization and activism. In some ways, your work is sort of a response to the call made, over 50 years ago from Whitney Young, that classic AIA keynote address that really challenged the profession to look at itself and change itself so that it aligns and reflects and represents the communities that it ostensibly served. So, Bryan, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about the roles of mobilization and activism as we move forward in design.
I think it's a great question. I think it's a huge consideration for me. I think most of my research and precedents and heroes are outside of the world of architecture, much more centered in worlds of social justice and activism. And so our elders and our ancestors who have gone through movements and built movements towards justice have been the inspiration that have led to a lot of the work that we do. And that, I often pinpoint the kind of conversations around W.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington in the late 20th century, 19th century, that really helped to define the kind of practical considerations of people in relationship to place. So if you're thinking about the Philadelphia Negro by W.B. Du Bois, which really started to understand and assess the kind of sociology of people in place in real ways, and understand that even if that sociology exists 10 blocks away, the definition of the culture of the people is somewhat different. And so acknowledging that the spatial consideration plays an impact on how people maneuver and understand their city and their space, to Booker T. Washington, which helped to create the Washington Rosenwald Community Schools, which during segregation helped to landscape the South with about 5,300 schools. That was a direct representation or a direct response to kind of Jim Crow, pig laws, all of the Black codes that came about. So that was a mobilization of, W.B. Du Bois mobilized not just the 7th Ward in Philadelphia, but researchers and community members kind of go and knock on every single door. They knocked on 10,000 doors to kind of get that research conversation going. Every single one of the buildings that were built by Booker T. Washington had communities making up more than 40 to 50% of the funds to build the building in the first place, but to organize and build these spaces that were not just schoolhouses, but were also community spaces, community centers. So I center things maybe starting there, but thinking about the Black Panthers and all of the many different types of spaces that they created to maintain, hold, and lift culture and community, to think about, a lot of the work done in the 60s and 70s in not just in the civil rights movements with churches and like those types of cultural spaces, but thinking about the kind of Black utopia spaces from Toni Morrison and Audre Lorde and all of these like brilliant writers that kind of gave us a sense of what fantasy and future might look like if it's rooted in a present condition of a people. And so I find all of those as generative opportunities to lead into the type of movement work we've done. So over the last decade, you've seen movements around, again, educational movements around Project Pipeline, which you've seen thousands of young people kind of engage with, to Design as Protests. Again, thousands of people across the country are a part of this organizing effort, which has 9 demands. We, over the last year or so, we've grown exponentially internationally, and we've forced institutions like AI New York and AI National to reconsider their conversations around building jails. So that's a tremendous feat for this organization. To organizing folks around Dark Matter University, which is another organization that helped to one of the kind of many co-founders of that organization, which is trying to revolutionize the way we think about educating the public around architecture. And so I think those are, the inspirations that led to a series of movement works that we've been able to put in place. And all of that has a direct tie back to how we produce architecture in service of people. None of it is just for the sake of it, right? Because if we go back to the kind of anchor condition of design justice, it is really to understand how we create racial, social, and cultural reparations through the process and outcomes of design, right? It has to start there.
It's fantastic. Thank you, Bryan. Mia, you've already illustrated many examples of the roles that designers can play outside of the traditional client relationship. So as an advocate, it's built into your firm's DNA. And in addition to that, this sidebar, there was an interesting question that was just asked about what's happened in the last year and a half of COVID. And I know in our previous conversation, you've talked about that advocacy interest pivoting and dealing with a lot of things that in the traditional purview of the designer we wouldn't even consider. So I'd like for you to maybe offer some of your thoughts about what advocacy means to you, and in particular in the near term regarding COVID.
Yes. Thank you. Well, in the near term, the first 6 to 9 months was, action associated with community groups, community members that you've gotten to know, and the issues of displacement as a result of, basically sort of owners of large pieces of real estate who were just, basically taking advantage of the moment, and food, and just the basics, right? Parks are not open. A lot of young people, when they were, studying at home, there wasn't enough bandwidth for people to do their work. So, being able to occasionally pick up the phone to people in the know, and who, like the head of the school district, and just saying, how can one help? Like, is it, so, I mean, I don't, as far as thinking about design associated with the times that we're going through is, obviously in terms of climate change, the urban forest, really thinking hard about how we use these interstitial spaces that are sidewalks, but not streets, but that are also need to be gathering spaces. And thinking about, all those edges along the rivers, the tributaries, the lakes, and making the cities more livable. But I think one of the things that also it highlighted for me, going to the images on the covers of magazines, is the notion that as you're making your choices, and it's clear with Bryan and obviously the three of you, which is, I was once called a regionalist, kind of as a critique, right? Like, oh, she's just a regionalist, and I was then sort of within the year invited to go to one of those countries where I'm not comfortable going because of the politics, and I don't want to mention necessarily who and how, to go and do like this amazing project along a river, a sculpture garden. And I'm weighing it, and I'm thinking, no, I can't get on that plane. So I think that what I'm hearing also, and it was so interesting to hear from Doris, is this idea that as you scale up, that somehow you give back to certain, to the communities and other places by allowing them to participate in, the endeavor and the commercial endeavor, if you could call it that, and that I think that's. That's great. I don't know if that answers the question, other than I think COVID has made us realize how we are connected across the world in ways that are very productive and in ways that are very sort of destructive. So that, it's allowed at least some of us to pause, to take more time, to be more empathetic, to live slower, better, And one of the things I learned was how much food you can buy for $300 and fill your car up and go to do the food bank. And I had deals with, we had already arranged for deals with 2 big food banks, but there was still so much need. And I would go, and the market would give me, just say, Mia, today we have a deal on this, and this, and this, and we put it aside for you. And, and the pleasure that I had in giving out sort of, not just food for today and tomorrow, but sort of culturally relevant food that people really appreciate, because, that's not where they were at.
That's fantastic. And I just pulled out a quote, to live slower, better. I think that's a fantastic framing of the possibilities, the opportunities, the upside of the time we have now. We have about 15 minutes left, and definitely welcome questions, but we have one that's been offered that I think everyone on the panel will probably have a good response to. The question is, as an emerging designer, how do I find a mentor? How did you meet your mentors? Doris, how did you meet your mentor? Or do you have a mentor? I haven't even, I'm presuming.
Sadly, I never had a mentor. And people ask this question all the time, and I never really had a role model either. And I always felt on the fringe and a little bit on the outside, being, both Asian and female in a field that has very few females and BIPOC people. But I think the nice thing is there's different avenues of finding mentors. I wish there maybe were more national organization. At our school at USC, we have multiple mentor programs. For example, we have it from the profession, and we have a group that actually connects mentors to our students. We have our students who are now mentoring the high school program that we just started this year called A-Lab, which is connected to LAUSD. So that we can mentor those young people coming up. Because again, we don't want to make a mentor system where it's just so far in distance, but can give you the steps forward. I actually myself am part of a program to mentor Black women in architecture and trying to bring them up through the program, and have been over COVID, and speaking about something that happened during this pandemic, was matched with a young architect who we've been only speaking via Zoom, which is actually, again, has been a very nice tool to be able to do that. And we speak once a month, and it's nice because, I already helped her find a position, and now she's working at Morphosis already, and it's fantastic. And she's like super happy, and she never thought that this could ever happen to her. So I wish I had a more direct answer to this, because I wish there were maybe some more national organized ways to connect. But I think that you would, if you reach out to the local university or the local design programs, that they may have some of these programs locally, so that you can hopefully even meet mentors in person now and not just virtually.
Bryan or Mia, what about mentoring for you?
I can speak to it a little bit.
I want to speak a little bit too.
So a couple things. As the emerging designer award winner on this particular panel, one thing is that you'll always be emerging. That is something that I've learned in this. This is like the third emerging designer award we've won. So it kind of continues to happen, which means that you're always looking for folks that can kind of help you and guide you in the next steps. And that's a good place to be. I think for me, my kind of strategy with mentorship was that everyone was my mentor, and they just had different amounts of times that they could kind of engage with me. And so I had a lot of mentors, and some folks were able to dedicate more time, and some folks weren't. The key to that is to not hold grudges when people can't. People get busy, because lives are hard and things get busy. And so luckily that meant that I ended up gravitating towards a lot of friends that are still with me to this day, whether that's Kathy Dixon or, a lot of NOMA friends, Kathy Dixon or Kevin Holland or Steve Lewis. Rosa Shang has been a tremendous mentor of mine. So, and I think the folks I would consider Kofi a mentor of mine as well, and peer. And I'd also say the other thing is don't be afraid to have peers as your mentors as well, right? Like that's a huge thing. People who are with you or maybe a step ahead of you relative to whatever the place that you're trying to go, and honor that everyone's journey is going to be slightly different than yours, and you can learn from one another. It doesn't mean that you only have to have a one-way relationship.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned peers because I was going to also go there. But I think my first sort of mentor was Peter Walker. He was the chair of the school when I went to school, to the Graduate School of Design at Harvard. And he was just, he was incredibly young. He was 40. And, basically just really yearning for new ideas and the relationship of architecture, landscape architecture, and art. So it was a fun time to be around him. And then around the same time, not that he was my mentor, but I did study under him, was Jack Dangermond, who was doing systems thinking associated with GIS and everything else we do, which comes from, I've got to claim it for landscape architecture, by the way, the systems thinking part of this. And then there was Cornelia Oberlander, the Canadian landscape architect, who was just amazing. And so she used to grab us all at, the ASLA conferences and just like lap us with stories and with questions and with support and, and just send us letters saying, go, go, go. And she was like a wonderful woman. She just passed away. And and she was also one of the first graduates from the GSD, the first woman from the program in landscape architecture. And there was Rosa Clias in Brazil, who was similar, sort of of the same age as the people graduating from Pete's class. But the way I think for me, my peers and my cadre of folks, they're not all women. The people I've met at LAF, for example, and women that I appreciate, respect, who are also in architecture and other allied professions, where we share and advocate for climate change issues at an international level, and we're making a lot of progress. So there's Kathy Blake and Martha Schwartz and a few others, and I always take time with some of my California mates or younger people who are working with me or then go to teaching, is to share the good, bad, and the ugly. Things that you uncover about how contracts are given out in the public sector or the private sector. What lists should be on, so you have opportunities, because you have to go through certain conventional processes, and how to engage in the process, for example, of community plans, or how important it is that you participate in that way in the city. Encouraging them all to realize and learn something that nobody shared with me, but which some are taking it to a whole other level. One of them was a landscape foundation, was an Olmsted fellow at LAF, and just wrote a book on schools. And so how important, not only, how important schools are places for learning and living in big cities and cities in general, what education means with better, nicer, greener schools. So I think that there's a lot of that interweaving and of course people you admire and that you just gravitate to for some lunches and dinners that just give you some wisdom. That are, some of the professors at US School, at UCLA, at the School of the Environment, and others that I also participate in some of the nonprofits and foundations that, are advocating for climate change, and just sitting down and getting to know each other's families and sharing, and then connecting people to each other. That seems to be really important too.
Those are great answers. I wish I had all of you when I was in school. I'm glad I have all of you now. I should just be counting my blessings right now. It's been a terrific conversation. We've only got a few minutes left, but we do have one more question. Unfortunately, it's the second worst question to ask at the end of the session. The first worst question is, how do you get paid? But the second one is, how do you deal with burnout and work-life balance? So this could be an entire panel on its own, just that one topic. But I wondered if we had just a short take about what you do to recharge and stay inspired.
So I would say that I recharge and stay inspired by visiting my grandchildren. And now you're supposed to say you can't possibly be a grandmother, Kofi.
You can't possibly be a grandmother, Mia.
But I
How
am.
is that possible?
Four. And that's so fun. I mean, it just takes you away. I do art projects with them. I plant. I have to say, one of the nurseries that I buy plants at sells tubs of worms and tubs of ladybugs and so I mean they expect me to show up with worms and ladybugs at all times, and that's one way to recharge. I wish I took more vacations, and I want to do that at some point, but I'm not very good at disconnecting. What can I say?
I guess I can add a little bit, and like Mia, I guess I can say what helped me and hopefully can help others too, is I actually think being outside really helps a lot, right? Getting to the outdoors and spending as much time outside as you can, and ideally doing a little exercise while doing that, right? Yes. So again, it can, it's always a positive thing, getting those endorphins going. And so that I think I was able to spend a lot more time doing during the pandemic. The other thing that I did, and I didn't have the foresight at that time, and maybe I'm generally an extrovert person and like to socialize, but when we went to lockdown, I realized it's like I can't see my friends anymore, and I can't do all these things. And so I actually set up some small groups that we actually met weekly on Zoom. And I actually ended up seeing some of these groups and these people more often than I ever would in real life, because we made it a weekly thing. And because it was weekly too, and things were slowing down, I think it was mentioned earlier, I guess living slower, better. We started thinking about what we could do during these times. And so we started making activities that were at that time, or in retrospect seemed a little silly, but were a lot of fun. So we decided to watercolor together. We don't watercolor. We don't know how to watercolor. We don't know how to do that. And so we then sought out people to give us advice on it, and who would come and almost teach us or guide us on our independent watercoloring little activity. We did knitting, we did all kinds of things, and actually kept us together. So it was a togetherness that ended up, and I'll just say it's these 6 women who are designers, that we ended up designing a COVID table together as a result of it too. I don't know if we'll ever use this COVID table. We're thinking about revealing it possibly to the public, but it's actually a very interesting design exercise that we did in the end, where we have 6 independent tables that lean on each other in order to stand up. And so as a funny thing, we call our table Eileen as a little topic. So it was a fun thing, and we are continuing this as we move forward, as we move in person more, because it was such a great exercise. And one of our group members now has moved at a distance. And so it's a great way that she too can continue with that group. So
my book group would be very disappointed if I didn't mention them, because we have a wonderful book group that gets together also on Zoom and has for before COVID, and even more importantly now. And also my walking group. And there is a women's group, a national women's group, that also has had some fantastic programs, across the country. So hooray for Zoom, I guess.
Hooray for Zoom, I guess. And with that, I think, unfortunately, if you would like to hear Bryan's secrets, I encourage you to go to Colloqate's website and to reach out directly. I'm sure he has some great secrets to share with us, but would like to take the time to thank everybody, to thank Cooper Hewitt, to thank the people of Detroit for hosting us virtually, to thank Doris, Mia, and Bryan, of course, for incredible insights and conversation today. I know I personally got a lot out of it. I hope everyone else did as well. And we wish you well. Thank you very much.
Kofi.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you,
you.
Kofi.
Thanks, everyone. This was great.
Thank you.
Talk all soon.
Thank you. Absolutely.